Thank you for coming to the Staff Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's Women's History Month event, celebrating the life and legacy of Nina Simone. For those of you who don't know, this year's Women's History Month theme is celebrating women who are activists. So what bigger activist for the civil rights movement is there than Nina Simone? She was one of the most powerful voices, at least women voices, in the civil rights movement. So we thought that we would bring in two of her biggest fans, Associate Dean Joy Canwar and Simone Clemente, to talk about her impact on their lives, her impact on the civil rights movement, and her legacy. And we're going to look at it through the film, the documentary, what was it called? What's Happening?
Yeah, What Happened, Miss?
Yeah, What Happened, Miss Simone,
Miss Simone,
which was released in 2015. It's on Netflix. If you guys haven't seen it, I really encourage you to watch it. It's a very powerful, moving documentary about her tragic life. So with no further ado, we'll start our questions, and I'll leave time for questions and answers at the end. So, ladies, can you remember the first time you heard Nina's music and what really drew you to her?
Me first? Okay. The first time I was exposed to Nina Simone's music, I was 3 years old. I grew up in a household of jazz, classical music, and there's an album cover that will come up that intrigued me at 3, and I always wondered, like, oh, mommy, who is this? And my mother would play the album for me, and that's when I instantly, yes, this one, yeah, and I instantly fell in love with her sound. And as I got older and learned more about her, I fell more in love with her. So that's how I was introduced.
So I remember Nina Simone being the backdrop of my entire college experience. I think she's like the soundtrack. So all of that, but I think in terms of the first time I ever heard her, it was probably in my elementary school years. My dad had a really extensive record collection. So a lot of the things were things like Indian ghazals, which are very like poetic kinds of songs, which at the time we were super embarrassed every time he played them, and our friends were over like, oh my gosh, can you turn that off? But then also he had a lot of Miles Davis, he had Nina Simone, he had really, really excellent taste in music, I would say. But I was also in piano, classical piano, from the age of 8 to 16, and have played my whole life. And I think hearing her gave me a huge appreciation of what one could do with classical music. It was just amazing to hear how she used her training to be so expressive. And so something that many of you, or some of you know, I know Karen knows this, is that I grew up in Nigeria when I was little because my dad was an architect, and at the time the country was moving its capital city from Lagos to Abuja, and Abuja was not built yet, and he was on the team that designed the capital city. And so we had a lot of other music like Fela and you know, Afro beats music in our house. And so I felt like there was a lot of, I could hear so many influences in her music as well. And then later on in the documentary, which hopefully, how many of you got a chance to see it? Okay, great. So it's really, really excellent. But I don't think you need to see it in order to obviously appreciate her. But I thought there was a very moving part in which she moved to Liberia. And I thought that was what an impact that had on her life, and the fact that she wasn't a musician there. She was just a person who went to the beach or went to the club or went to wherever and just lived life rather than performed. So it's such a great gift that she provided all of us. But I think in her own life, she wanted peace. So a lot of those scenes kind of reminded me of, you know, what I remember of West Africa, and so I felt like, that also brought up the kind of influences she had there, but mostly college, a little bit though when I was little, and I was like, well, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to do this too, and obviously I did.
Well, Joy, you kind of led us into the next question, or the next thing I wanted to discuss. So the documentary talks about, or shows initially at least, early on in her life, some ladies saw that white ladies, she grew up in the South, for those of you who don't know, noticed that she was a really good pianist. And so she got lessons and was taught to be a classical pianist, and they were really training her to become one, and that was her dream, really. And she refers to this dream over and over in the documentary. And so she moves to New York. They got her a scholarship to Juilliard. She was there for a year, and then I believe she auditioned for this prestigious conservatory, I guess it was.
Curtis Institute.
In Philly,
in
and
Philly.
she was rejected, and she was crushed. Her dreams kind of really fell through, and she realized at the time, it obviously wasn't her first experience with racism, but that it was because she was Black that they rejected her. So anyways, at this point in her life, she has to reassess things. At least this is how the documentary portrays it. And so she goes to work in Atlantic City, playing in bars and nightclubs. Her family moves up from the South, and she kind of has to reinvent herself. But this is when she took on her name. Her given name at birth was Eunice Wayman, if I'm right. And so her family, they move up from the South, and so she has to help support them. And they are very religious. Her mother was a preacher, and so she didn't want them to know she was performing. So she changed her name to Nina Simone at that time. And so she performs, and her career takes off. And in thinking about her life, and let me just make sure because when you see the movie, she keeps referring, how she says, or the documentary, how she would have been happier if she would have been a classical pianist, and just her sadness and sorrow kind of like overwhelmed me, at least in the movie. I just felt so, I don't know, just sad for her. But I wondered, in reinventing herself, two things. So this is what I thought. I wondered how much she lost of herself when she was kind of forced to reinvent herself. How much did she have to give away? Is that why she wasn't happy? Or was it because she had to reinvent herself? Was that when she found her voice? And was that when, because they referred to her as the patron saint of the rebellion, was that when she really became, herself? So I was wondering if you guys had thoughts on that.
She, like you said, she always wanted to be a classical pianist. That was her dream. This, doing jazz, doing odd jobs, that was just a way to make a living until she became well known. I think she did what she had to do. This wasn't planned. This wasn't like, oh well, I'll just go ahead. She did what she had to do to make ends meet, just to live. And I think what gave her meaning was during civil rights era, especially seeing in early days with Dr. Martin Luther King, and when she wrote the song called Mississippi blank blank. And that, I think, cemented her voice. Before then, she was just doing what everybody wanted her to do. She played jazz, she played the classics, she wrote her own music. But I think it was that pivotal moment that cemented her, and that's where she found her voice.
So one thing that we discovered when we were chatting about this event is that Nina Simone and Simone Clemente are actually named after the same Simone. And who was
Simone Signoret is an Italian actress. My mother named me after her. I thought I was named after Nina Simone. I wasn't. It was Simone Signoret, and Nina took her last name from Simone Signoret.
So, yeah. But in terms of her, I think she would have been herself no matter what platform she was given. But I think that the moment that she was alive, which was to see the civil rights movement and everything that was going on, she she was going to make that her platform, despite, I mean, Mississippi Goddamn, I thought we could say that word here. So I was about to say that was one of my favorite songs. However, because of those kinds of songs, she was silenced in a lot of ways, or wasn't promoted in the same ways that other artists were. And she had, I mean, even Billie Holiday had a much bigger career and presence, even with her songs of resistance, but the impact on Nina was greater. And towards the end of the film, when you see her living outside of the United States, after Liberia, of course, she was in Europe for a lot of that time, and a lot of that time she was back to playing in tiny bars with hardly any audience, and it was through the intervention of friends, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about what was going on in that part of her life, but that was when she was able to come back and be seen again. But I think a lot of it is just sort of thinking about who she was and what she was able to do in the time that she was alive. Because if she were alive now, what platform would she have?
Just to piggyback on that, my take on it was, during the time, she was in your face, and she was a strong Black woman at a time when you just didn't do that. She didn't fit the mold. Billie Holiday, Hazel Scott, other artists, I think mentioned even males like Harry Belafonte and Marvin Gaye. Those artists, they kind of fit a mold in which they said what they had to say, but it wasn't confrontational. Nina was confrontational. She just walked right up. There was a segment in the documentary where, when she first met Martin Luther King Jr., and she went right up to him, didn't introduce herself, just went to him and said, "I'm not nonviolent." And he's like, okay, that's fine, that's fine. That's who she was. And because of the times, and because of her naturalness, for lack of a better term, even when I looked at her images during that time when everyone had nice straight wigs and all that, she was wearing a natural, even in the early 60s, which was unheard of for a woman during that time. So she was confrontational, and I think because of her presence and that type of demeanor, that hurt her career as well.
So do you think it was because of her personality more than the fact that she was like a Black woman that her career kind of tanked?
It was both.
It was both.
I think it was both.
Yeah, I don't think it can be separated. It's because she was who she was at the time that she was. And I think that Simone is absolutely right that her sort of fortitude and her willingness to be herself always was so much of who she was. And I think her daughter is the one who made the documentary, and you can tell that they had a fraught relationship. As with many people who are geniuses, they don't always have the best home lives, or they're not always the most accessible type of people. And so obviously that had a huge impact on her daughter. But I think that there's no doubt that she was going to be a genius no matter what. It just was. It's unfortunate if people or students now wouldn't know her, or have heard maybe just one song that's in an ad or something like that, because she was so ahead of her time in so many ways.
And I'll just say, for those of you who don't know, Spencer Province is a huge jazz aficionado. He knows a lot. He would have loved to have been here, but he is very busy right now. But he did come and talk to me a little bit in my office about her, and he did say, she obviously had a huge impact on a lot of artists today, and she's constantly being sampled in music, Kanye West, Jay-Z, referenced in song lyrics. She's still very, you can feel her today, her presence. And he said that's how my kids know of her, is they hear her songs through like Common and these other artists. So anyways, all right, so I keep turning this on and off. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is what I found very like moving. In one of the interviews, she defines freedom as having no fear. Somebody asked her, like, what does freedom mean to you? And she also says she's only experienced it a few times in her life, and that was on stage. And, she talks about what she would give to at least live half her life as being free. But for me, it got me really thinking about how brave of a person she was. If she's living in fear all this time, yet she's going on stage performing, she's speaking her mind, at a time when people didn't do that. And they even talk about her using how when she used that goddamn on a lyric, it really ruined her career basically. But she didn't regret it. She never would take it back. So are there moments in the movie or that just you both know of her that strike you of examples of her bravery?
I think her whole life was an example of bravery. She was a free spirit. She lived how she wanted. She did what she wanted at a time when just being a woman, you had limitations. So she broke through all of that. And so I think her entire life was just one step of a form of bravery. She was like, this is me, deal with it or don't. And she really didn't care. She really didn't care. I always got the sense that when she performed, there's always been this, like she was a diva. And she would actually stop performances if she heard someone speak or they weren't paying attention. She would actually stop and even storm off stage. And to me, they say, oh, she's a diva, she's difficult to work with. I think because of her classical training, she expected, you go to a classical concert, you sit there quietly, and you don't cough, you don't move or anything while the person's playing. And she wanted that same level of respect while she was playing. And she took it that far to say, you know what, if you're not going to respect me, I will not respect you. And that was bravery in the 1950s, 60s, even the 70s, for anyone to do that. But she made people reckon with her to say, hey, you came to see me, give me the respect to listen to me. And she demanded it, and she got it.
Yeah, I agree also. I mean, it's not one thing, it's everything, every single thing you ever hear about her, every performance. I think it's most fun to hear her music from the live performances because you can hear her bantering with the audience and hear who she really was. In the movie, at one point, she's calling out a woman who's not sitting down, sit down, I'm going to stop the performance. And but it is, from the time she was little, her parents were asked to sit in the back. She would not play until they were in the front row. Whether she was a little person or she was a world famous person, she was very consistently demanding of respect as she should have been, right? And that was probably surprising, but I think she was very, very real. And so Simone put this together. This is beautiful, and these are her actual albums. Not Nina Simone, but Simone Clemente's actual albums of Nina Simone. And what strikes me so much is how, you can look at any of these things and they can be from any era, but she goes back to times in which some of the things look like African iconography almost. It's like she has herself as the high priestess of this or that or whatever. It's so beautiful. And none of it is sort of mimicking the style of Hollywood or anything. She is definitely doing her own thing, and she's very much, she says somewhere in the movie early on, she's like, Black people are the most beautiful people in the world, and you know that she is, she truly believes that, almost in a way like, why wouldn't you think that, right? And so all of her music actually is a sort of asking, just, kind of has that in mind. So even with the song that I know we keep cussing in this room, but Mississippi Goddamn was sort of like, I'm so upset about this and I can't believe this. Like, what in the world, right, is going on? And the way that she approaches it is not like, here we go again, but rather, this is an urgency. Even the way that she plays that song is urgent. We need to have a conversation right now about this. And so she speaks through what she's playing. And besides the fact that it's just beautiful music and she's obviously extremely talented, she is constantly talking through her music.
Yeah, she's talking through her music. She's sending messages through her music because of her pride, her Black pride. Mm-hmm. And a song she wrote, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, based on Lorraine Hansberry's play, if I believe so. Mm-hmm. And she lived those messages. She believed those messages, and she would play it. I think there was a scene there where she played it, and she told college students, "This is for you. Be proud of your accomplishments. Be proud of who you are." And you could just you could see the joy in their faces when she was performing it. And there's another scene. They showed a clip of it in the documentary, but I actually saw the movie Questlove's Summer of Love, and she did a whole segment performance, and that was, to me, that was like her rallying call to African Americans, like, come on, people, this is our time. Let's get with it. Let's be proud. That was her rallying call. They showed a little excerpt of it, but if you get a chance to see Questlove's documentary, just in general, just a side note, just in general of that concert that no one heard about or knew, it's entertaining, and it highlights a particular era. But she was a part of it, and I was happy to see her be a part of that. But her message was always, be proud of who you are. Because actually through her everything, she was proud of who she was. Mm-hmm. I always got that from her. She was proud of who she was.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, what's so interesting is that she wanted to be a classical music, a famous person in classical music, which is Western European classical music, right? The highest form of that, that culture, basically, if you call it a culture. It's like one of those things where that's what she strived for, is to be recognized for that, but she never was not Black. Yeah. And that's amazing. Like one of those things where it's like, but of course, there's nothing inconsistent about that, right? So she wasn't like, oh, I can't play this none of this, or I don't want to be part of this because I'm striving for something. And there was a scene somewhere in the documentary in which she got to play, I want to say either Town Hall or Carnegie Hall, right? Mm-hmm. And she said, oh, but I would have wanted to be on this stage playing classical music. That was the dream, right? Yeah. And so she always had that. I wonder if she ever got to just do a classical concert at some point.
But it also made me sad. Like, here you're being yourself. It's her own music. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just wanted, you should be happy with what you're doing.
But she wove it into her music, her classical training. Because if you listen to it, there are a couple of scenes in the documentary, you hear the training. You hear her influences of Bach and all. You hear it in her songs. So it wasn't the way she wanted it, but she made sure that it came out in her performances.
All right. So one of the other things, and we've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but is her activism and how the civil rights movement really gave her purpose and meaning. But it also was obviously very emotionally stressful. And they talk about this several times, how much stress it put on the activists, every activist was facing at the time. And her daughter mentioned that the stress of the civil rights movement caused her voice to break, and it never recovered. And then, so her family, for those of you who didn't watch the documentary, lived right next door to Malcolm X's family. And they were very close, and they were like godparents of each other, and were always over. So the daughter of Malcolm X was interviewed and plays a large role in the film. But she talks about how much activists sacrificed to be a part of the rebellion and the civil rights movement. And this included someone's sanity. And that, you know, at the end of the movie, you see how Nina's mind and she's kind of going between highs and lows, and you can see like fits of depression, and she talks about wanting to take her own life, and, you know, just how low she is feeling, and a lot of other things are going on in her life as well. And this is when she also says she would have been happier if she was a classical pianist. And she kind of envies other artists who were kind of able to put the civil rights movement aside. But do you think, and we kind of touched on it already, but if she started speaking today and being a voice in like the Black Lives Matter movement or whatever movement out there, would she have had to make the same level of sacrifice that she made?
I think she would have been herself, and she would have fit in this time as well. I don't think there would have been the same stigma or even knowledge then of, at that time, mental health was not ever talked about, and I don't think even she was diagnosed as bipolar at the end of the documentary. Or that comes up at the end of the documentary, and that was not even a well-known concept at the time. So I think being alive now, she would have been herself, she would have had her place and her voice and been just as famous, but I think she would have probably had more access to inner peace and help. And I know the daughter she doesn't seem super convinced that the medication was great for her mother. That she took, and so that there are questions there about whether that dulled her, you know, sort of ability to engage with life. But I actually often think about all these historical figures, if they had access to mental health resources, how their lives would have been. So maybe I don't know. Or maybe they would have been known about or not. They would have been happily doing whatever else. But maybe they would have just been happier themselves and still able to access that thing that makes them creative. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think she definitely would have thrived today. Her mental illness at the time, it not being known as she was coming along, that hurt her a lot. The medication, when they finally started giving medications, you can just look at her and tell the light went off when she started taking the medication, and I kind of felt sad for her at the end, because you knew that, okay, this is not Nina, this is not her, but it was the only way for her to function. If she came along today and with the advances that we have, yeah, I'm sure she would be happier, live a much more fulfilled life, but I don't think she would be totally satisfied, because she only wanted one thing, to be a classical pianist. Mm-hmm. And if society and the music industry, I don't think they would allow her to even do that today. I think there would be some sort of obstacle that they would only allow her to be to rise so high because of the personality. She was in your face, take me or leave me, and that still doesn't resonate even in today's society. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the medication, so at the end of the film, she has to kind of make a bargain with some of her friends, a band member, and I don't know who the other guy was, but they were friendly with her. They kind of rescue her. She was really living in really poor conditions in Paris, performing, as Joy alluded to, in these really small clubs where no one was there. She looked very disheveled.
She was destitute.
Yeah, she
lost everything.
Struggling. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of come in and they give her a home, but they say, you have to take this medication. So she agrees to take it but she kind of like loses herself. And her daughter says, she said, you know, that she was really concerned about how she lost that light. Now, do you guys think she was forced into that situation? Or do you think, like, I was like, I don't know if do these people have her best interest at heart, or were they, I don't know. That was they didn't really go too much into it, and I was like trying to not judge them too much, but.
I think they did have her best interest at heart. They loved her.
Yes,
They
yeah.
genuinely loved her, the person, not just the artist. They loved the person. And I think it broke their heart when they found out how she was living in Paris. And they wanted to do whatever they could to help her. And if knowing about her personality and how erratic she was, if this was a way just to keep her so they could book the gigs for her and she could earn a living again. I think at that point in her life, I think she was willing to do just about anything. If they told her, yeah, you have to take all these drugs, she would have done it. Just because somewhere in there she knew, I can't live like this. This is not how I want to end up. So, but I think it was done out of love. I never thought that they were trying to exploit her or her talent. I think they genuinely loved her and wanted to see her in a better place.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing we haven't talked about is the reason she was living abroad is that she left her husband, who had been her manager and had been quite abusive. Yeah. And so that was not a thing I knew about her life, actually. I feel like I knew a lot of things I didn't know.
Very violent.
Yeah, that he was extremely violent, which is a story, and we're doing this presentation for Women's History Month, and the theme of this month, every year there's a different theme, and this year's theme is activism, women's history and activism, and so this was we jumped at the chance to do this, but this is also an old story in the sense that there's a lot of control and abuse and physical abuse that she was fleeing. So at the end, I actually think that people investing in finding her again and finding a way for her to perform where she does feel seen and free, not in these small places, but again on huge stages, was out of love as well. But the middle of the story was very, very rough for her. And I think that's part of what broke her as well. And so can't be taken out of the story.
Her husband at the time was her manager, and he pushed her hard. And I think that also contributed to her break. But it was also during those years that she became famous. So as horrible of a man as he was to her, he was an excellent business person and knew how to market her. And he's the one that got her to Carnegie Hall, to Town Hall, to all the big venues. It was under his tutelage. So, you wonder, like, okay, you're doing this for your wife, you care for her, but then you're going to turn around and be physically violent to her. That was a whole other, that's another discussion on another level. But it was because of him that she rose to the fame that she did get. And he does play a pivotal part in her story. He does.
Yeah, you can see the taut relationship he has with her daughter too. But yeah, back then there were no domestic violence. I mean, it just wasn't a thing. That didn't really start happening, I think, until like the late 80s, 90s, like where it, so she was able to flee to Liberia. That's where she went. But yeah, then she just kind of, I don't know if she lost the money or if he took the money. That doesn't really go into that as much, but yeah, it was very tragic.
Yeah, she lost the money. She owed taxes. You hear the same story with a lot of artists. That's how
she lost her money. Yeah. So I don't really have that many other questions. Do people have other?
So I was wondering if anyone has favorite songs, or something that you are, some way that she impacted your stories as well. We have a mic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I can, while
While you're thinking.
in preparing for this weekend, I was sharing with both of you. I kind of, with the help of my son, who also is a fan, immersed myself in Nina Simone and just jazz ladies during that time, just listening to different music. And what struck me, and this is about Nina's classical training, I listened to Hazel Scott, I listened to some other female artists that play the piano. There is a distinct difference between their playing and Nina Simone's. Nina is powerful. She plays the piano. This may be wrong or not PC. She plays the piano like a man because you feel that force. And there's nothing gentle about it. And she's like, this is the song and this is how I'm playing it. And I kind of gained a renewed respect for her musicianship and how she also weaved in her classical training into jazz standards. And also her voice, when you hear her sing, it's a distinct voice. She doesn't sound like anybody else but Nina Simone. And I just gained an appreciation for her. And then seeing younger generations of my son and singing, who have been exposed to her through sampling and different forms of music, I sometimes wonder if they get the full effect of who she really is and what she contributes to our musical culture and diorama. So that's my little my little take. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I need the mic. Oh, all right.
Oh, for the Zoom people, you might.
Yeah.
Do it for this.
Yeah.
I guess I was just so taken by, Kathy, your saying that she defined freedom as safety, is that right?
Living without fear.
Living without fear, right? And then to hear the end of the story, right? To really just have a sense of kind of what the arc of her life kind of was. To put that together with just the thoughts about activism and her, sort of almost, idealistic kind of view of what the classical music would sort of bring, right, sort of to her. And the burdens, right? The idea that activism was such enormous weight, right? Such an enormous weight to do that work, and then to kind of think of it as also being a space of loneliness, right? In the sense of not generating the kind of community that we think of, right? You sort of, think, so for Black History Month, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, we did One Night in Miami, right? And you have this sort of sense of, these men meeting up, right? And there's, even though I think it's probably false, right? But a sense of community, right?
Yeah.
And some of what comes through and what you're saying is sort of not that community, right? The fierceness of kind of being an activist, the fear that kind of goes along with it. And I think we live in such a privileged time, right? In the sense of not really understanding how unsafe life was, right? Like what it meant to grow up in the South, what it meant to, to not have right access, what it meant to speak out, right? And really kind of create fear, right, in people, right, that didn't sort of bring kind of a sense of celebrity and heroism, but more kind of loneliness, right? Just to stand up. So I think just so powerful to sort of bring all of that, sort of together. And I think for me, just kind of feeling more of just kind of the weight of what it means to be an activist.
She definitely talks about how many people she's lost, as in, Martin Luther King, obviously, Malcolm X, Laureen Hansberry, like all these people were huge roles in her lives and she's lost them. So, it's very tragic.
So one of the things I was thinking about kind of on Karen's point is if she had been let into the Curtis Institute when she applied, at the very end of her life, 2 months before she died, she was given an honorary something or the other. I'm just like, oh. But yeah, basically. And so, but I was thinking, had she gotten in there, what would her life have been like?
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just because it would have been, I mean, I don't doubt she would have been part of the civil rights movement as an icon or a voice of some kind, but she would have just gone straight through with that classical training and not been singing on top of songs, and that was just because whomever in one of these Atlantic City clubs was like, you should probably sing on top of the songs. That wasn't what she was even planning to do. But I just wonder, like, if those little things, those little roads, if, you know, the era had more of an ability to have her thrive in what she wanted to do, how would her life have been? It's just really interesting to think about that. And so I don't even know the Curtis Institute now. This is the only thing I know about them. You know,
I saw it. There's another documentary out on Nina Simone, and they actually touched on the Curtis Institute. Their claim is that it wasn't racism. They had 76 applicants and only 3 spots. That was their claim. And my question is, now, if for years it just seemed as though they never said anything, and she's always spoken about how the reason why she didn't get into Curtis. And I'm like, why didn't they say something sooner if that was not the case? Why did they wait till just before she died, or I think a little bit after she died, to say, oh, well, we only had 3 spots. This is the only reason why she didn't get in. And I always wondered if that little tidbit, if that had been known, if it was true, if that had been known, how that would have changed her life. Would she be as angry? Because I always felt as though she was angry about that and the reasoning. And I wonder if that would have changed her outlook on things. But we'll never know.
I wonder who those other 3 people were.
Yeah.
I'm like, we don't know their names. So. Does anyone have anything else?
Yeah, what are your favorite songs?
Well, you know, the first time I heard "Strange Fruit," I'll never forget it. I know Billie Holiday sings it too, but yeah, like the imagery she brings up in a lot of her music is very powerful and haunting, and, you know, as a white person, you know, it just like, I feel like, you know, all this like history and like, you know, just sadness and like sense of shame on my behalf for whatever reason, issues, but yeah, like that song, my baby don't care. Like I can hear my parents like playing that more like upbeat jazzy music in my childhood, but it makes me smile. But yeah, I kind of am drawn more to her powerful like activism like songs.
My favorites, well, My Baby Cares for Me. I Loves You, Porgy. Her version of that, I have the original album from the play. So to hear from Porgy and Bess, her version is, to me, it's just like heartbreaking. You feel the despair. Another favorite song, and these are, she did from the musical Hair, Ain't Got No Life, and she did a rendition of that, and just kind of changed the whole meaning of the song. And I loved how she interpreted the popular music of the day and just gave it a whole different meaning. But those are like my 3 favorites. I Love You, Porgy, My Baby Cares for Me, and the song from Here, I Ain't Got No Life. I think that's the name of it, but yeah.
So I like the I like the activism, the songs, but I think from like a child's perspective, from hearing her the first time, I think I love all the songs where she can really show off her classical skills. And that's why I like the live versions the best. So there's the Montreux version of My Baby Just Cares for Me, where she actually is playing, and I think it's Sugar in My Bowl. I think she's actually playing two songs at the same time, which is totally unbelievable. Like, you know, she is, and I think that was the one, when you see the documentary, Miles Davis heard that version, and he was like, play that for me again? How is she doing that? And it's just so good.
Yes. Yeah.
So in some sense, like this her kind of, I just wonder what you think about, you know, the sense of loss around not being able to do the classical music, you know, and kind of what she was seeking there. But in some ways, like that space is a space of mental gymnastics, right? Like for a musician to really understand, you know, classical music and to kind of think. Thank you, Alan. Great job. You know, so it's just interesting to kind of think about what she saw in that space, right? I think a lot of us sort of think about the life as being where she would perform, you know, like the Carnegie Hall and the this, that, and the other, and kind of whatever, and playing this kind of music and not singing, right? But that there had to be kind of like a mind game piece of it, like the mental piece of the music itself, right? Of constructing the music, of thinking about it, of thinking of the rhythms, the various sort of phrases and stuff like that. And that the loss, in a sense, is kind of, you know, as if, you know, you were a great reader and then your books got taken away, right? Or something like that.
I don't think she ever lost it. I think that was just a part of her. I think that was part of her genius, was just crafting the songs. And even in her later years, even on medication, you could still see her crafting the orchestration in her mind, how she was going to play. She and the piano were one. I think whenever she sat in front of the piano, that was when she was at peace. And whatever was in her head, that's what came out. So that was part of her genius. And I think that, you know, not many people can do that. Not many people can do that. And to play two different songs at the same time, I encourage everyone, if you can, to listen to it. It will blow your mind.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It will blow your mind. It is amazing how she does this. And that's what sets her apart.
Just thinking even how your mind would figure, like tell your hand to act.
Any other
All
questions?
right. I think we're
Comments?
just about
Just
at time, but
okay.
yeah, this has been really, really nice. Yeah, thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
this space with us.
Thank you.
I think more music. Great, more music. We should go out on music.
Yes.